So there's been a lot of buzz and talk around the Switch community lately because of cloud versions of games. But honestly, the Switch has had cloud versions of games for years. They just haven't had any in the West until this recent announcement for Hitman 3 and Control. While I can't really say I was super excited about Control coming to the Switch via a cloud streaming release, I was still pretty excited as Control is something I've wanted to play for a while. And like in my review of Remothered Broken Porcelain, I will take part of the presentation section to compare this streaming version on the Switch with the PC version via the GPD Win Max. So here is my review of Control Ultimate Edition Cloud version for the Nintendo Switch. When it comes to story, Control is all about that paranormal science fiction. The plot is about a young woman named Jessie who's been tracking down her lost brother for several years, her search eventually bringing her to a government facility known as the Bureau of Control. She sneaks inside expecting a lot of resistance from this strange group that appears to have kidnapped her brother all those years ago. But she's surprised when the Bureau itself is under attack by a paranormal force and she becomes the director of said Bureau, with a lot of the workers working with her instead of against her. Now, as a big fan of paranormal activity and the like, I really enjoyed the Bureau itself and the story that was told, as the Bureau kind of reminds me of the SCP Foundation. The story is also good because it is unpredictable. From the very beginning, the game shows you so many different twists and turns. You start it up and the game's thinking, oh, you think you know what's going on. You think she's just going to be sneaking around this facility being chased around by FBI agents and directors. Well, how about this? Boom, now she is the director. This kind of storytelling does fit the horror and sci-fi genres, but it just made for a really nice experience, especially with all of the lore they throw in the background. When it comes to gameplay, Control is a third-person action game with shooting elements thrown into the mix. But before we dive into gameplay, this is the Ultimate Edition of Control, meaning it has the base game, the 2 DLC expansions, photo mode, and the assist mode, essentially a cheat system allowing you to go into options and reduce damage, make yourself invincible, allow you to refill your ammo almost immediately, kill enemies in one shot. Something that allows you to go through the game on a power trip if you're more interested in the story than the gameplay. These features also help the fact that this is the cloud version, and let's take a couple minutes to talk about that. When you get Control Cloud version, you don't download the entire game onto your system, you download a small launching program. The game itself is on a server somewhere and you stream it to your Switch using the internet. It's very similar to how PlayStation Remote Play works, allowing you to stream your PS4 and soon PS5 onto another device. This means you have to be connected to the internet at all times to be able to play the game because you're not actually playing on the Switch system, and the quality of your Control experience will heavily depend on how fast your internet connection is and who else is using it. The game has 2 different modes that you can play in. Enhanced Performance Mode, where the resolution is lower, and Enhanced Graphics Mode, where it is higher. Depending on your internet connection, you might not even be able to use Enhanced Graphics Mode, which I'll get into in just a moment. So when I played the game, I used my personal internet connection, which is 30 megabytes per second down and 5 up. I received a fair amount of input lag while playing it like this, giving me about half a second for each input to register. And with that connection speed, the game automatically defaulted me to Enhanced Performance Mode every time I played the game. The streaming also ate up pretty much all of the bandwidth my internet connection had. If I connected another device to the Wi-Fi and tried to download something, the network connection in Control would immediately tank and give me a little message saying that I could no longer play the game because my internet connection was too slow. So there's definitely some restrictions with how much data the streaming takes up. And speaking of how much it takes up, let's talk about the price. This version of Control allows you to play the game for free for about 5 or 10 minutes to make sure your internet connection is going to be good enough to stream the game. But after that, you do have to pay $40 for Ultimate Edition, the same price you would pay on other platforms for the full game that you don't have to be on the internet for. Now don't get me wrong, Control is a great game as we'll get into later in the review, but paying the full price for a streaming version just doesn't seem right. But we've talked enough about that, let's dive into the game itself. Control is a third-person action game set in the large Bureau of Control building with lots of different areas for you to explore and lots of fast travel points to help you with backtracking. Now, each chapter has you exploring certain parts of the building with solving puzzles and fighting against enemies as you gain more supernatural abilities as the director. All of these abilities are pretty interesting from the get-go, with you going through this special trial area when you're learning how to use each power. They can also be used for solving puzzles as well as fighting enemies. You do have a handgun that's used for combat that's highly customizable, allowing a simple handgun to act like a bunch of different types of firearms. But the game becomes really fun when you start combining your psychic abilities with the handgun itself, like jumping into the air and levitating around the room while shooting enemies at the same time. Tying all of these systems with the fact that the gameplay is just as unpredictable as the story, often giving you areas where you're expecting to fight massive hordes of enemies and it's just exploration, really makes Control a great and fun experience to go through. And speaking of the overall experience, let's talk about content and length. If you don't use assist mode, you're going to be spending about 10 to 15 hours on the base game and quite a few hours more once you beat it and unlock the DLC expansions. Next, let's dive into presentation. The visuals themselves are pretty varied. They'll jump around a lot, especially if your internet connection changes and it drops you out of graphics mode into performance mode. But regardless of the jumping around, it's gonna look really nice and detailed no matter what you do. But now let's dive into that comparison I mentioned earlier. You can get it on the Switch and have the input lag in streaming, or you can download it onto a GPD Win Max portable laptop and play the PC version. This choice is pretty easy to make depending on what's more important to you, visuals or performance. On the GPD Win Max, I had to get the PC version down to a pretty low resolution to get it to stay above 30 frames per second all the time, whereas the Switch streaming version easily stays above 30 frames per second no matter what your internet connection is at. So if you own both platforms, it's basically, on the Switch, I have a lot of input lag and have to be tethered to the internet at all times, but it looks really nice. Whereas on the GPD Win Max, it doesn't look nearly as pretty, but I don't have to be on the internet at all times and I don't have the input lag. That's all I have to say about performance, so now let's dive into battery life. On the original model, Control has a battery range of 2 hours and 34 minutes up to 3 hours and 55 minutes. On the Nintendo Switch Lite, it has a range of 2 hours and 56 minutes up to 4 hours and 6 minutes. And on the Redboxer V2 2019 model, it has a range of 4 hours and 5 minutes up to 4 hours and 48 minutes. Now, in conclusion, Control is a great game from its story to the combinations and interactions you can get from its combat and ability systems. Unfortunately, the Switch version being the cloud version creates some problems, from input lag and restrictions on your internet connection to them wanting you to pay the same full price for a streaming only game that you can pay for it on other platforms. Reviews to Go rates Control Ultimate Edition Cloud version for the Nintendo Switch a 7 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thanks for watching and have a great day.